player.
He came onto the national scene as part of a coalition of Islamic parties that was put together by the Inter-Services Intelligence to oppose Benazir Bhutto.
Mr. Nawaz Sharif became Chief Minister of Punjab, and from day one, he started defying the orders of the federal government.
The PMLN, controlling the Punjab, was clearly trying to take over.
So her entire period in power was spent fighting battles.
Unsurprisingly, within 18 months of being in office, she hadn't solved all of the problems in Pakistan and was certainly vulnerable to political criticism from a lot of different quarters.
There was no plan. The entire focus was on getting Zia out and getting elected, and once you actually got there, there wasn't a plan.
Her whole focus was on the struggle for democracy, for getting rid of the dictatorship. And frankly, I don't think her party thought much about what they would do once they were in power, and anyhow, they were just barely in power. They really tied her hands in terms of what she could do.
The ISI was very active. Their sole aim was to displace her. They did not want her to stay there. They didn't even want to give her a month.
She always used to say then that we were in office, not in power. Shortly after that, her government was removed by the army.
Disqualification is really very meaningless. I won't be the first leader to be disqualified.
So very rapidly they removed her from power, and Nawaz Sharif came in.
Well, after 20 months in office, she was deposed, ostensibly for corruption. But that's what they say about everyone. It becomes an excuse when a government is inconvenient.
I do not believe that she was personally corrupt. But I also know that the standard way to go after Pakistani politicians is to allege corruption.
It was incredibly disappointing because people had had all these hopes.
It was a time of acute disappointment for Pakistanis, I think, because she didn't do very much.
My first term, we were very inexperienced. Certainly we made mistakes, but we were sincere in our intent, sincere in our purpose.
I mean, we are expecting one individual, and that individual who I now think was alone, totally alone. Yes, she had this political body, but she was head and shoulders above everybody else. Maybe that was her tragedy. That was the tragedy of the Bhuttos, that nobody around them could match them.
I get arrested after the first government falls.
He was being held hostage to her political career, and we knew that from the very beginning.
Her husband has consistently been demonized. It was made to seem that she was a princess, he was a playboy. Every little thing, whether it was right or wrong, would just get excessive play.
They offered so many times for these trumped-up charges to be dropped if she would agree to not be in politics. And he would have no part of it. And of course, she wouldn't either, but she was so proud that he in jail said absolutely not, no.
Bilawal and Bakhtaur, who was a little baby, come to visit me in prison. And obviously we couldn't tell him what prison was, he was too young for that. And we would always say, Baba, your father's in his office, because the meeting place would be the office of the superintendent of the jail. So one day, Bilawal holds my hand and he says, come with me. I don't know how old you were, maybe 3. So how much does it hurt that you can't do that?
Sacrifice that really defines Benazir and Asif as individuals, and sacrifice is the word that describes their marriage. What I saw develop in that relationship was really quite amazing.
Soviet occupation of Afghanistan is officially over. The Soviet defeat has been fully consummated. The last Soviet troops have gone home. The deeply scarred Afghans will now be left to shed each other's blood all on their own.
Soviet force withdrew in a state of abject defeat. There was a vacuum. The United States cut its aid to the Mujahideen, did absolutely nothing to put money into Afghanistan to try and sustain the very few leaders that were available. And we didn't. We just allowed it to fall into chaos.
I asked Charlie Wilson, what is going to happen to all these toys that you leave behind? So he practically puts his hands together like this and says, well, the Mujs are going to fight among themselves and we shall buy them for the price of shape.
One of the saddest things is that after the Mujahideen dislodged the Soviet Union in Afghanistan, using Pakistan really as a transit point, the United States really kind of turned its back on Pakistan.
The U.S. was on the next bus out of town. We didn't stay to try to really reconstruct civil society, to build a democratic society. We were just gone.
We were left alone. Warlordism started. All the Mujahideen who were there, brought by us from all over the world, 20, 30,000 of them. Where were they? They were all holed up. 4 million refugees came into Pakistan. Did anyone talk of resettling them? You needed money to resettle them. Nobody's doing anything of the sort. So therefore, they coalesce and become Al-Qaeda.
Benazir was the one talking about the danger that was posed by the Taliban and Al-Qaeda.
All across Pakistan, secretly, cells have been operating, which have been trying to undergo militant training. And we don't want that because we feel that this is a threat to Pakistan.
Benazir came on her first state visit to the United States, and she spent some time alone with Bush 41. And she told me one of the things that she said is, Mr. President, I fear we have created a Frankenstein.
Her message largely fell on deaf ears.
Marching peacefully when Mr. Nawaz Sharif used the coercive apparatus of the police to start beating unarmed demonstrators from moving.
Nawaz Sharif and Benazir were the only game in town as far as Pakistani politics were concerned. And as a result, whenever there was disaffection with one party, the establishment tended to tilt in favor of the other.
She was consigned to the political wilderness, but Benazir Bhutto is back. Her supporters call her conqueror of dictatorship, leader of democracy, queen of Asia. But now she faces a new enemy, her own family. The fight is over a dead man's legacy, that of Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, Benazir's father. The challengers for the title are his widow Nusrat and his eldest son, Murtaza. The defending champions, Benazir's husband Asif, and Benazir herself.
It wasn't just that the Bhuttos were contending with the Sharifs, it was that the Bhuttos were contending among themselves.
Murtaza sends a message from Syria. He wants to be politically active in Pakistan. So she says that I can't afford your positions. Your positions have always been very extreme.
She said, please don't. You will make things difficult for me.
He stands for election, but he's not allowed to travel out of Syria. He sends his papers through my mother-in-law.
I could not forever base my politics on the remote possibility that it would hurt my sister's politics.
There was always a tension that Zulfikar Ali Bhutto had selected his oldest child and not his oldest son.
It was a family feud in a sense, two families, each believing that they had the right to inherit the kingdom.
On the 19th of October,